Before today's video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. If you want to see a case or topic covered by Paranormally Listed, then go to criminallylisted.com and fill out the questionnaire under the Suggest a Case tab. Number 3. 44 Severn Street, Hull, Yorkshire, England. They used to call it, appropriately in this case, a scullery. A small kitchen at the back of a small house, usually with no more than a sink, a gas stove, and an icebox. It was here where Emily Garbett was going about preparing Easter Sunday dinner on April 1st, 1945. At only 49 years old, Emily was already a long-time widow. Her husband, having mysteriously vanished and been declared dead 16 years earlier, leaving her to raise her then 10-year-old daughter alone. But without her husband's income as an engineer, Emily struggled to make ends meet. She sold off much of her extra furniture and her beloved piano, and opened the third bedroom in her house to a 55-year-old lodger named Frederick Watson. 15 years passed under the new living arrangement without incident. Emily's daughter grew up and moved out, becoming a nurse at a local hospital, while landlady Emily and boarder Fred lived in seeming harmony for all those years. Emily was well liked in her neighborhood just off Holderness Road in East Hull. She was friends with her neighbors and always stopped to chat. For his part, Fred was a hard worker at his job as a car mechanic. He drew no complaints from his employer. But at age 65, he was forced to retire, which changed something in him. He grew more morose and became hard to live with. Things got tense at 44 Severn Street. Emily and Fred bickered more than usual, to the point where the next-door neighbor, Lillian, started hearing their fights through the walls of their row house. Which leads us to that dreadful Easter Sunday in 1945. That morning, Emily and Fred had yet another fight. It was so bad, Lillian said later, that Emily went next door to allow Fred to cool off for a while. Around mid-morning, Emily returned home and began preparing Easter dinner for herself and Mr. Watson. She peeled potatoes and put them in a pot on the stove. Given that her kitchen was small, Emily had to wash the crockery as she went so it wouldn't pile up. As she stood at the sink, Fred entered the scullery with an axe in hand. It was likely Emily Garbett never knew what hit her. Fred struck the woman in the back of the head with the blade 6 times. Coroner Dr. P.M. Scott said at the inquest that Mrs. Garbett's wounds were 6 inches deep. They caused considerable hemorrhaging of her brain matter. Perhaps realizing what he had done, Fred Watson opened the oven door and pushed Emily's broken head and shoulders inside of it. Then he turned on the coal gas, allowing the room to fill with toxic fumes. Fred then took 2 common razor blades from the bathroom upstairs and a pillow from the parlor sofa. He placed the pillow near Emily's feet, laid his head upon it on the floor, cut his wrists, and waited for the gas to do the rest. And it would have too, had it not been for Lillian next door. Still worried about the fight from earlier that day, she fretted as the 10 p.m. hour rolled around and she hadn't heard anything from next door. She asked another neighbor, an army private named Leeming, to go to number 44 to check on things. When he couldn't enter the front door, Leeming flagged down a local cop and the two entered the front window. That's when they discovered the grisly scene in the scullery. The bloody axe just 6 inches from Emily's body, a pot of uncooked potatoes still atop the stove, and the dish scrubber still clenched in Emily's cold fist. Though Fred Watson was not dead yet, he was unconscious and he was taken to nearby Kingston General Hospital. When he eventually awoke, he found Detective Inspector Clivingston standing over him. The detective asked Fred why he did it. "I have no idea what you're talking about," was his only reply. The trial started months later, in June 1945. Yet, despite its sensational details, it gained little to no interest from the media or the people of Hull. One back-page newspaper article described the court gallery only as consisting of 5 onlookers, one of them being Emily's 26-year-old daughter. For his part, Fred Watson, now nearing 70 years old, refused the judge's appointment of a solicitor for his defense. He probably saw the writing on the wall. But the judge insisted, under Watson's vehement protests, on giving him a lawyer anyways. It was a constitutional move that probably saved Fred Watson from the noose. While no motive for the crime could ever be established, one defense witness told the court Watson likely suffered from melancholia. It was then a medical term to denote what we now call as clinical depression. The diagnosis, the doctor said, often comes with unpredictable bouts of blind rage. The jury seemingly took pity on the man, finding him guilty, but insane. The legal term at the time was criminal lunatic. And the judge sentenced Fred Watson to Willoughby Mental Hospital, telling the court, quote, "There is no doubt that as soon as the doctors consider it safe, he could expect to be released." As Emily Garbutt's daughter watched on from the sparse court gallery, she wept, having had no justice from the justice system. But it's possible that Emily Garbutt set out to find justice from beyond the grave. In 2007, Mike Covell moved his family into Emily Garbutt's old house at 44 Severn Street. He actually grew up on the street, but he had no idea of the grisly horrors that occurred in the house 60 years earlier. As he wrote for the Hull Daily Mail in 2022, everything seemed perfect at first. Then one night, my eldest child woke up screaming. Covell describes how he found his son screaming in bed, saying there was a man at his door. The man, the boy said, had a piece of wood in one hand and was slapping it into his open palm. Covell chalked up the experience to a bad dream, until a week later when his son screamed for help again. Covell rushed to see what was wrong when his son said something that sent a chill up his spine. "He's behind you." Spinning around to find no one there put the father at ease for the moment, but the unsettling feeling continued in the house for weeks. Later, after Covell's daughter told him about an old lady who sometimes sang to her, he hit up the local library and was shocked when he uncovered the horrible history of the house. He said, "The story of Emily's death left me sick to my stomach." From there, Covell contacted a local priest who performed an exorcism on the house. According to Covell, the priest said he needed to exorcise 2 spirits, one a man and the other a woman. Covell told the priest they could leave the woman alone, but that man had to get the hell out of his house. The trick seemed to work. Peace was restored to 44 Severn Street, and, according to Covell, every year on April 1st, the family lights a candle for Emily in the scullery. Number 2, 508 East 2nd Street, Villisca, Iowa. It was a cold night in June, and darker than normal, aside from the sky being overcast with nary a sliver of a new moon. The City Council of Villisca, Iowa, had been in a financial standoff with the electric company that month, so the power company killed the street lights. The darkness made the Moore family house on East 2nd Street a perfect place for murder. And that's exactly what happened on the night of Sunday, June 8, 1912. Josiah Moore, his wife, 3 sons, daughter, and 2 visiting friends were all slaughtered that night, bludgeoned by an axe murderer. 8 lives gone in 8 fell swoops. The next day, when a neighbor worried she hadn't seen the family yet, she called Joe Moore's brother, Ross, who discovered the horrors on the upper level. Each victim had their faces split open. The killer was so manic, he buried the axe head into the ceiling above their beds before striking the fatal blows. Investigators found bloody bed sheets and clothes carefully covered over the windows and mirrors in the victims' faces. To make this horrific image even more horrible, police estimated that the killer took the time to light a kitchen kerosene lantern before his deeds, carrying the lamp in one hand and the axe in the other as his shadow methodically went from dark room to dark room. Then, with his spree mercifully finished, the killer wiped down the axe blade, leaned it against the wall, and vomited all over the hallway, before escaping into the darkness of East 2nd Street as the rest of the town slept. The next day, some of the town's 2,000 citizens gathered around the house. Town Marshal Hank Horton stepped out into the front porch and announced, "Good Lord, there's someone dead in every bed." Onlookers gasped. Some shouted for justice. But their cries were in vain, because no one was ever convicted of the Moore family murder. Sure, there were more than a few suspects. A few were even brought forth to stand for circus-like trials. But nothing stuck. The murder rampage remains officially unsolved. In other words, Joe Moore, his wife Sarah, their sons Herman, Boyd, and Paul, their daughter Catherine, and friends Lena and Ina have never been able to rest in peace, even today. Darwin Lynn and his wife Martha bought the dilapidated Moore house in 1994 and used historical photos to restore the home to its 1912 condition. Then they opened the front door for $5 tours, eventually having it land on the National Register of Historic Places. But the hauntings didn't start right away, Martha said. Only after she heard a few unsettled museum visitors did she begin to suspect something otherworldly afoot. She set up infrared cameras which captured some mysterious orbs in the dead of the night. On a hunch, she left out some toy balls in the living room. If there were any ghosts in the house from the murders, she reasoned, 6 of the 8 would be under the age of 12. In the morning, she noted that the balls had moved from the places she left them. As she told the Des Moines Register in 2011, Darwin never wanted this to be a ghost house. It's just what happened. Said neighbor and frequent visitor, John Hauser, "I caught the voices, I've caught the shadow figures, I caught the chairs rocking, I've even caught every door in the house slamming." So terrified was one former visitor of the house, producer Kim Busby, it inspired her to write a horror film about the house called Haunting Villisca. As Busby told the Register in 2008, "When I stepped over the threshold to the pantry, I suddenly felt a strange vertigo feeling, almost like you get on a carnival ride, but as soon as I stepped back, the sensation went away." Busby says she stepped back and forth a few times and felt the sensation come and pass as she did, almost as if she was stepping back and forth through time. Perhaps back into 1912, into a cold and full dark June night, where a maniac waited upstairs. Number 1. Highway 38, Harlan County, Kentucky. Locals in eastern Kentucky call her the Lady in White, and encounters with her spectral image are legend in the area going back 60 years. Generally, the ghost stories go something like this. A man is driving behind the wheel, heading down Highway 38 through Harlan County, when he passes a woman in a white silk robe or dress standing along the roadside. The driver will study the figure as they pass it, but upon looking in the side mirror, they're shocked to find that the figure has vanished. Confused, the man looks into his rearview mirror, only to see the mournful face of the Lady in White staring at him from the back seat. We say him in these stories because of the ghost sightings. Almost all of them have come from men. And when you hear the story of who the woman is, it's pretty easy to see why. Marguerite Craig didn't have much luck with men. She divorced her first husband, John Gilbert, whom she married in 1941. In May of 1946, she married her second husband, as her 4-year-old son, William, stood by her side. At the time of her second marriage, Marguerite was only 19 years old. Hoping perhaps that her marriage to 24-year-old Albert Colvin might be the one to stick, Marguerite gave it her all. She and her son moved into Colvin's 4-bedroom house in Verda, Kentucky, and made the house a home. It was wedded bliss, neighbors said, for about 6 weeks. Then, on Sunday evening, June 16th, Marguerite's next-door neighbor heard a tremendous fight at the Colvin house. But it was when she heard William call out, "You killed my mother," that the neighbor called Sheriff Cawood. Once Cawood safely escorted the little boy out and took him to the neighbor's house, did he go up to the master bedroom, but he wasn't prepared for the mess. Furniture was overturned, drawers were flung out with clothes strewn about the room. Marguerite was dressed in a white sheer negligee, lying face down on the floor. The right side of her face had been opened up by an axe which lay near her feet. Moving closer, the sheriff was astounded to see blood bubbles gurgling from Marguerite's mouth. She was still alive. The sheriff lifted the bloody woman in his arms and took her to his police cruiser. Racing down the highway to nearby Harlan Hospital, where Marguerite held on for about 6 hours before succumbing to her massive head wound. Marguerite's mother, Flora Craig, traveled with her 4 sons to claim her daughter's body and to collect her grandson, bringing them back to Tennessee. And Sheriff Cotwood set about trying to find Albert Colvin. For 4 days, authorities combed the county for the coal mine attendant, until the man finally turned himself in to a city patrolman in Harlan. He, of course, was charged with murder, with a trial slated for October. Marguerite's family didn't expect much of a to-do, however. They knew Albert was guilty of sin. Marguerite's son had pretty much pointed at his new dad and said he did it. But Albert must have had one hell of a lawyer, because he managed to get his first-degree murder charge pled down to voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to just 15 years in prison, which meant he would walk away free at age 39. While there may not have been justice for Marguerite's family, there was salvation. William Gilbert was eventually taken in by his birth father and raised with John Gilbert's children from a later marriage. William passed away of cancer in 1997 at age 54, leaving behind 5 children and 5 grandchildren. Had the Colvin house in Verda not been bulldozed shortly after the whole murderous affair, it's likely Marguerite would have stuck around the place, bent on payback for her unjust demise. Instead, she was forced to wander the Harlan Highway looking for men, hoping to get a little revenge. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.